Have you ever noticed that right when things start going well and you're making progress towards your goal, that's when you stop showing up? You procrastinate, you sabotage the work, and sometimes when you get opportunities, you totally ghost them. And all of this looks like self-sabotage, but what if you're not sabotaging yourself at all? What if you're trying to avoid something worse? So at this point, you might be wondering, what are those worst outcomes that I'm trying to avoid by ghosting opportunities and sabotaging things when things are going well? So there are really three main worst outcomes that you're trying to avoid by putting on the brakes. So one reason is that it helps you avoid the loss of something that you value or need that's being met by the status quo. For example, let's say that Jenny wants financial independence, and so she wants to build a business, and she wants the business to be really successful. And one of the main reasons why Jenny wants to start this business is because she doesn't have a lot of money. So she's having to live with roommates, she's having to carpool to go to work because she doesn't have her own car, she has to do her laundry in the public laundromat. And she's also working this job where she interacts with a lot of coworkers, but she doesn't really like the job. And let's say that Jenny has a self-concept where she really thinks of herself as an independent loner type of person. And so Jenny dreams of being very successful with her business and making lots of money. And she thinks, oh, if only I had a lot of money, then I would be able to have my own place, I would be able to have my own car, I'd be able to have my own washer and dryer, and I'd be able to work for myself as a solopreneur. And consciously, because Jenny considers herself a loner, she doesn't really value social connection that much. And yet social connection is a core human need. And right now in the status quo, Jenny is getting a lot of social connection by virtue of not having a lot of money. That she's living with roommates, she's carpooling to work, she's going, and doing her laundry at a public laundromat, she's working around tons of coworkers. So she's passively meeting a lot of her connection needs that she doesn't really consciously realize that she needs and values. And so when she dreams about being successful with her business, there's a part of her that holds her back because deep down that part values connection. And it says, oh, if conscious Jenny meets those goals, what's going to happen is we're going to be alone. We're not going to have the connection that we actually need. And so then when Jenny gets great opportunities or the business actually starts to progress, she finds herself holding herself back, hesitating, wanting to stay in the status quo so that she doesn't lose her connection needs. And what Jenny would need to do instead is she would need to actually incorporate her need for connection into her conscious goals. That way, that part of her that's sabotaging her by keeping her in the status quo is going to get those needs met if she reaches her financial goals as well. So if she begins to see her business and financial goals as something that's going to lead her to greater levels of connection, then she has no reason to hold herself back and to keep herself in the status quo. And all of the self-sabotage that's been going on has been there to avoid a worse outcome, to avoid losing connection. Now, if all of this feels relatable to you so far and you want to learn how to stop self-sabotaging and finally reach your goals, I highly recommend checking out my free webinar, 3 Shadow Work Secrets to Get Out of Your Own Way and Reach Your Full Potential Without Having to Fight Yourself. And the link is down below in the description box. Now, the second reason why you might be sabotaging your goals right when things are going well is because the thing that you think you want isn't actually what you want. And the question of what do I really want seems like a simple question, but really it takes a lot to actually know what it is that you want. And the issue is that we have all kinds of identities and worldviews and general ways of operating in the world that can obscure from us what it is that we really want. And instead we start operating through, oh, I should want this, or oh, if I'm going to get this other thing that I'm not really aware of, then I have to do this other thing to get there. And so everything becomes a means to an end. And it can be really difficult to figure out what it is that we want as an end in itself. We can also get very, very attached to certain vehicles of bringing about what it is that we want. So I'll give you a personal example that happened to me 11 years ago. So when I was a kid, I always knew that I wanted to be a teacher. It was always just ever since I was 5 years old, I went into kindergarten and I saw my kindergarten teacher teaching and I was I'm going to be a teacher. And so I held on to that goal of being a teacher for a long time until I was about 11 years old. And I fell off the wagon of that goal for a little bit. And then when I was in high school, I decided again that I was going to be an art teacher. And then I made that happen. And so it was this big 20-year long journey that I was on between the age of 5 and 25. And so I was teaching and I, deep down, I really wasn't happy with it. And I couldn't acknowledge that to myself because I was very, very attached attached to my teaching career because everything in my life had been leading up to being a teacher, and it was such a strongly held onto goal. So I really wasn't capable of acknowledging how miserable I was in that career. Then during my second year as a high school graphic design teacher, I just ran into this block where it was almost like I just couldn't focus on grading any papers, and my classroom management skills dropped. And this is how I know I was sabotaging myself, because during the evaluations where they assess how you do as a teacher, I invited the evaluating administrator to come in during my worst class. And I had this rationale of like, okay, well, it's important that they come in during like the worst class so that they can actually give me pointers about things so that I can actually improve. But then what ended up happening is I ended up having my contract not renewed the next year, which is effectively a firing without being fired. And so it was one of those things where I had just done all kinds of things to sabotage this goal that I valued so much. And then when I lost the job, I had to scramble around, and that led me to creating my YouTube channel, The Diamond Net, and I got to be a teacher, and I actually got to teach the things that I wanted to teach. Like, I had always been wanting to teach wisdom to people, and I was thinking, okay, I'll be an art teacher, and then I'm going to slip in little tidbits of wisdom here and there, but that never ended up happening. And it was like teenagers weren't like the right audience for the type of wisdom that I'm trying to teach adults are. And so I feel like it was some mixture of my own self-sabotage and like just the universe aligning in a particular way that ousted me from that really deeply held onto career path of being a school teacher, because all I could imagine when I was a kid is being a school teacher. That was the only outlet I thought that I had for teaching, but it was actually a misaligned outlet. And now I'm so much more aligned with the context that I teach in. And so really that part of me was trying to avoid a worse outcome, which was staying and progressing in a job that I really deep down didn't align with. And instead, it put me in a situation where I had to reevaluate things and find a career path that was more aligned with me and my truest, deepest will, the things that I really want. And so this is a perfect example of how sometimes when we're sabotaging ourselves, we're really operating as our best ally. Now, the third reason why you might be sabotaging yourself right when things are going well is because you're trying to protect yourself from an outcome or feeling state associated with the pursuit or achievement of your goal. So in this case, it's a goal that you really want, and it's not about maintaining the status quo. It's about protecting yourself from and avoiding some side effect that might come along with the pursuit or achievement of that goal. For example, let's say that someone has a goal to be a public speaker, but they have some childhood traumas around being ostracized and made fun of by other people. And so when they go up in front of other people and they are public speaking, maybe they feel just fine about it. They've kind of gotten over that, but there's a part of themselves deep down that wants to hold them back so as to avoid being in front of a large group of people, even though that's their conscious goal, and consciously they aren't really bothered by the possibility of public embarrassment. Or some common examples that I've seen in the past 7 years working as a coach is, let's say somebody who has financial goals, money goals, business goals. They want to be more successful, but they associate financial success with disconnection because that's what they experienced in the past growing up, where maybe they had less than everybody else and felt disconnected from other people, or they had more than everybody else and they felt disconnected from other people. Or maybe it's the case that somebody has a weight loss goal, they want to get in shape, and yet they feel ungrounded if they lose weight. And so they're trying to avoid the worst outcome of feeling ungrounded by keeping weight on. Or let's say that somebody wants to launch a business and they keep procrastinating and self-sabotaging because they're trying to avoid the worst outcome of experiencing failure. And so to them, maybe failure means something fundamentally about them. Like, oh, if I fail, then that means that I'm not good enough. Or if I fail, that means there's something wrong with me. So it's avoiding like making steps toward the business to avoid the potential for shame along the way. Or maybe it's the case that someone consciously wants a relationship, but they don't know themselves well enough to know where their boundaries are. So if they get into a relationship, what's going to happen is it's going to be a relationship that's totally misaligned with them, that's constantly going over their boundaries. And so part of them sabotages their goal to get into a relationship because the boundaries would need to be there first in order to avoid worse outcomes of them living a very misaligned life where they lose themselves in the other person. Now, just really quick, I wanted to mention mention that I offer support for people who are struggling with self-sabotage and procrastination and holding themselves back from their goals. And so if you would like to work with me, then you can put it in an application at the link down below in the description box. Now, you could be sabotaging your goals and opportunities for one, two, or all three of these reasons. So they're not mutually exclusive. So there are three simple questions that you can ask yourself to assess your reason for self-sabotage. So the first question is there anything about the status quo that I'm attached to that I would lose if I achieved my goal that I'm trying to achieve? For example, if you have a financial goal and you started making more money, would you lose an identity or a worldview that you're attached to? Would you lose a sense of goodness? Would you lose connection with people? Now, if you're able to surface an answer for this question, it's probably the reason or one of the reasons why you're holding yourself back. And so what you would want to do is you would either have to let go of the attachment to that thing in the status quo by figuring out what is it that makes you so attached to that thing, or if it's something that you genuinely want and or need, then what you want to do is you want to tweak your action plan, tweak your vision of what you want in the future to incorporate that want/need. That way it doesn't feel like you reaching your goals are going to be in opposition to having that need met or getting that want met. Now, the second question here, and this is the most difficult question, is do I really want the thing that I'm going for? And this can be challenging because we can get really, really attached to our goals, even if deep down we don't really want that thing. And so if you sit with this one and you eventually recognize that there's something about your goal that's out of alignment, either it's not what you want or you're not approaching it the way that you want to be approaching it, then you want to actually make a change to your goals in order to bring your goals more into alignment with what it is that you want. And I call this getting into alignment with your truest, deepest will. So not a surface level will, but something that's really deep in your heart of hearts, the thing that you really want. So the more that your goals are aligned with your truest, deepest will, the less likely you're going to be to sabotage yourself. But again, this one can be the most difficult one to deal with because that means fundamentally letting go and changing courses with something that you might be quite attached to. Now, the third question you can ask yourself to figure out what the worst thing is that you're trying to avoid by holding yourself back is you can ask yourself, what am I trying to protect myself from that's off in the future if I pursue or achieve this goal? For example, let's say that I get an opportunity that comes into my inbox to write a book for a publisher, right? And it's something that I really want to do. And yet I find myself not replying to the publisher, or, maybe they ask me for a sample chapter and I don't give them a sample chapter. If that's the case, I want to ask myself, what am I trying to protect myself from off in the future when there's nothing about the status quo that I'm attached to and I do genuinely want the thing? Well, maybe it's the case that I might feel overwhelmed by the responsibility of being expected to write something for a publisher. Maybe that adds a level of burden or a sense of over-responsibility. And maybe because I got too much responsibility put on me at a young age, now I'm aversive to responsibility and there's a tendency to rebel from any kind of power structure, including the publishing house. If that's the case, I want to get really clear on what that pattern is that I'm repeating in this situation and what it is that I'm really trying to avoid. And in this case, it's maybe I'm trying to avoid being controlled. Maybe I'm trying to avoid having an editor come in and say, oh no, take this thing out and don't do that thing. And so what I would really have to do here is I would have to have the courage to face into the vulnerability that I would feel having an authoritarian structure placed over me, forcing me to take my creative pursuit in a certain direction. And maybe it would reveal a desire for freedom and a tendency to rebel to get freedom. And so whenever I'm procrastinating and avoiding things, I'm rebelling because part of me feels unfree if I were to be contained within an institution. Or let's say that Tanya has a really great idea for a business, but she keeps holding herself back. And part of it is that she just feels really intimidated because she's going to have to get a business license and then the taxes are going to get more complicated. And maybe it's the case that back in childhood, Tanya struggled in school and was told that, she just wasn't good at math or wasn't good at things along those lines. And so it always made her feel like she was not enough. So in order for her to pursue her business, she's going to have to do some math related things, but that's all this trigger for feeling not good enough or not smart enough. And so in order to avoid feeling not good enough and not smart enough, she just pumps the brakes and doesn't ever start that business. And so what she would have to do is she would have to come to see herself as capable, but she would also have to embrace her weaknesses. She would have to say, you know what, math isn't my strong suit, but that doesn't really mean anything about my capacity in these other areas. And so all of these patterns can cause you to hold yourself back with your goals and cause you to feel like you need to be extra disciplined and have tons and tons of willpower to get stuff done. But that's actually not true. And I recommend checking out this video to figure out what you need to do instead of using tons of willpower and discipline.